Let's just follow up on the Bitcoin issues. You had a settlement with 2 ICO issuers as well as another exchange for not registering with the SEC. What's the message here, and what about the people who currently own ICOs? What's the value of their ICOs if they're dealing with a not registered security at this point?
Well, Bob, let's separate securities from non-securities. I think we've been clear that we don't believe Bitcoin is a security, but many of the ICOs that you see and you talk about, they are securities. And if you're going to offer and sell securities, you have to do so in compliance with our laws. I think we've been clear about that. The recent actions further emphasize that our securities laws do apply to the ICO space. If people are going to raise money using initial coin offerings, they either have to do so in a private placement or they have to register with the SEC. And when you register with the SEC, you got to provide financial statements and disclosure along the lines that we would expect.
So are all ICOs essentially in non-compliance? I know there can be some narrow windows where they might not necessarily be so, but you seem to be saying they're all in non-compliance right now. That seems to be the message.
We've had no ICOs registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. To the extent an ICO has been conducted offshore or pursuant to a private placement exemption, fine. To the extent that you've conducted a public offering in an ICO, it's non-compliant.
Let me just move on. The Bitcoin ETF, we've been waiting for a long time for some final determination from you on that. Can you give us any update on where that might be?
The Bitcoin ETF is something that's been in front of the Commission. I'm not going to comment on timing or anything like that, but we've been clear about some of the issues that are of concern to us, including trading in Bitcoin and whether there's reliable price information on trading markets, and as well as custody, as well as whether people who hold those assets can count on those assets to be there in the same way you can with other assets that underlie an ETF.
Let me move on. We've got a number of questions for you. A couple of months ago, President Trump said that he was concerned about the requirement about quarterly reporting, quarterly earnings reports, and suggested we might want to look into that. Does the SEC share any of those concerns, and are you planning to do anything about it? Are you planning to hold hearings or something like that in the near future?
So I think the president touched an important nerve, which is short-termism. I don't think any of us wants our public companies to be run exclusively for the short term. And the question is, does our regulatory environment, does our investment environment drive too much short-termism? That's something we are looking at, Bob.
Does it? Sorry to interrupt, but
no.
Does it, based on what you've been seeing so far?
You know, it may. I think that when people go for quarter to quarter to quarter, but yet the investment horizon in their industry is for the long term, that really doesn't add up. Now, making a general statement about that is pretty difficult, but to the extent that that exists and our regulations are driving it, we should examine that and see whether our regulations can be improved without in any way degrading investor protection. Look, we know that investors thirst for information. They thirst for reporting, and it's an essential part of the liquidity in our marketplace to have good reporting. The question is that reporting as good as it can be? And is there a way we can drive longer-term thinking in our marketplace as well as responding to the demand for short-term information?
I think what I hope you will look at is not just whether we need to have quarterly reporting. That's an interesting question, but how earnings are reported. It drives all of us here crazy every quarter to have to deal with GAAP numbers versus adjusted numbers. We're constantly on the phone with the analysts, on the phone with Thomson Reuters, trying to understand what the numbers are, and then they change it. And so it makes it very difficult to report to the public, honestly, how really did the company perform? That's something that I think we'd all like to see a little bit more clarity on.
Look, Bob, I think there's a very good point underlying what you're saying. First of all, the sanctity of GAAP. You have to have common accounting standards. Let's just settle with that. Now, when you depart from GAAP, what we expect to see when you depart from GAAP in your reporting is you tie it back to GAAP, but you also explain that that's how you run the business. And if that's how you run the business, it probably should be consistent from quarter to quarter, so that it's easier for analysts, and investors to track those quarter-to-quarter changes.
I have to say, I take a different view on this. We discussed it before. I think analysts are always going to come out with their estimates. They may as well be guided by the company. But just to move the conversation on, Jay, you mentioned regulation. In light of the DOJ case against Goldman Sachs at the moment relating to the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, do you think the US investment banks have strong enough internal controls at the moment, or whether this needs to be looked at again?
Look, I'm not going to comment on any pending cases and or that area.
The industry as a whole, the controls are sufficient in your eyes?
Look, our job is to continually look at our registrants. We inspect our registrants. It's something that we take very seriously.
To switch focus and talk about Twitter, we were discussing some of the comments Elon Musk has made just before the break. When you saw that he called the SEC the Short Seller Enrichment Commission, what was your reaction?
Did he say that?
He did. Indeed.
No, look, again, I'm not going to comment on enforcement matters. That matter's been settled. I think the settlement was an appropriate settlement. I think from a message to the marketplace, CEOs know that if they speak, they need to speak clearly and accurately. As far as I'm concerned, that matter's been settled.
And if he made the comment, as he did on Axios over the weekend, that Tesla faced a severe threat of death due to Model 3 production ramp, did that therefore mean some of his comments during that period, the 6-month period, were misleading to investors? If the comment is true that it was...
It would be completely inappropriate for me to make those kind of judgments.
Well, let me just move on. How is the SEC patrolling market-moving activity on Twitter? Is there a mechanism in place? What are you doing to make sure that people are making truthful statements?
Yeah, let me back up, Bob. A while ago, we, the SEC, said that Twitter or other forms of social media could be an appropriate means for disclosure. They're followed closely. I just saw you're following Twitter. That's how you get your information. But the key there is could be. You have to use them appropriately. And when you're going to make disclosure, you've got to do so in an accurate and complete manner.
Before we let you go, this is the 10th anniversary of the whole Bernie Madoff scandal. I know you weren't there then, but can you tell us, is the SEC different than it was back then? Is there anything that exists now that would help ensure that kind of scandal, something of that magnitude, won't happen again?
You know what, Bob? Scandals are never the same. They rhyme. I worry all the time about what the next scandal might be. And I can tell you that there are 4,600 people at the SEC that are, if they don't have it in the front of their mind, they certainly have Madoff in the back of their mind. And we continue to worry about whether there's something like that on the horizon. And, look, one thing that has changed is our tips, complaints, and referral system. If there are things that people in the marketplace are seeing that they don't like, they can contact us. They can do it by phone. They can do it online. We want to hear from them.